welcome to Wineskins, a program that features the lives of the saints and reflections on the Sunday readings, along with information on a variety of topics and issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Jim Korda. Our program is brought to you through the annual Diocesan Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. Our interview segment today will feature Father Jack Lavelle. We will also get a glimpse into the life and times of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, along with reflections on the readings for this 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. That and more on Wineskins. Joining me now is Vicki Vicars, who is the Executive Director of the Mahoning Valley Association of Churches. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You know, you've been with MVAC for several years now,
I have.
And so you're very familiar with their ministry and their work and mission. Before we talk about some event, the Mayor's Breakfast that's coming up, we'd like to talk about MVAC. Give us a little history of how it all started. What's the purpose of Mahoning Valley Association of Churches?
So the association actually started in 1916, so it's well over 100 years old, where churches in the Mahoning Valley, and usually that's Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana County, just come together for fellowship, to support one another's programs, to address common concerns. And we have a few events that we sponsor ourselves to build that relationship between the Christian community in the Valley.
Let's go back to that whole idea of working together as Christian communities. You know, kind of look back over these centuries when the early church gathered, and the new Catholics and the new Christians and the new people of faith got together to talk about the Lord and his mission and how they would continue that in their work and ministry. And that really is the work of Christianity, isn't it? To carry on the work of the Lord. What has been some of those works and some of those activities that MVAC has been part of that kind of carries on the mission of Jesus?
One of my favorite ones is that we have sponsored the Crop Walk in Mahoning Valley, which is usually in October, and then we work with Church World Services to raise funds to end hunger. And the benefit for our community is that 25% of the funds raised stay here in the Mahoning Valley to support agencies that are fighting hunger locally. We usually get about 50 to 100 people, so it's not a huge event, but it does make a difference.
When you mention that, the one thing that comes to mind is my mother, God bless her soul, over the years has been part of the Crop Walk.
Oh, okay.
And that was an annual thing that she always got involved with, especially with her parish and other folks, and she worked very closely with them. So when you mention the Crop Walk, I automatically remember my mother in that.
Yeah.
One thing that's coming up, Vicki, that we'd like to talk about is the Mayor's Breakfast. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. It's the Mayor's Interfaith Breakfast, and it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, so this year it's November 26th. We usually bring in a speaker. Sometimes it's a mayor, sometimes it's another local politician or elected official that talks about how their faith influences their work, how their faith in Jesus keeps them steady and focused and enables them to be a better public servant. So this year, our speaker is Lynn Morrow, who is an attorney, so we're excited to have her. And it's interfaith, so some of our prayer leaders then aren't just from the Christian churches, but we usually have someone from the mosque and someone from a local temple come and pray as well.
Let's talk of how important it is for people of faith to come together, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism or Muslim, but people of faith to come together. What does that do when that happens?
Oh, I think it supports our common work. It helps us to realize that we're not alone in transformation and that we're not alone in not just spreading the good news of Jesus Christ, but we're not alone in allowing God to work in our communities. And just that support that we have one another is vital.
And one of the words that I'd like to talk about is that word of respect. And there needs to be respect for other people's faith traditions. And that's really what I think MVAC is all about, is to understand that as people of faith, we need to respect one another's religion and faith and how we practice that, all the while building one another up, not tearing people down.
Exactly.
And I think in this world today, that is crucial for us to do. How does MVAC, in your role, continue that mission?
I think in my role, it's bringing more churches that reflect, maybe some doctrinal differences, but have that same common bond. So bringing more of them on board, getting the word out that while we are different, we are united, that we have a common goal and a common focus.
If the folks that are with us would like more information on the upcoming Mayor's Interfaith Breakfast, who do they go to? What do they do?
So we do have a website, and they can find us Mahoning Valley Association of Churches.com, or they can call me. I know I have a MVAC phone number, but I forget it at the moment, so they can call me personally, and my cell number is 330-717-8953. We also has a Facebook page for anybody that's on social media. They can find us there too.
Vicki Vicars, Executive Director of Mahoning Valley Association of Churches, thank you so much for your presence on our show. We look forward to subsequent times you're going to be with us to talk about MVAC and its mission, and thank you so much for assuming that leadership role.
Thank you.
For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Korda. St. Francis Xavier Cabrini was the first United States citizen to be canonized. To tell us more is Sister Marie Barile. She is an Oblate Sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
St. Francis Xavier Cabrini is the first citizen of the United States to be canonized a saint. The process began only 11 years after her death, and she was canonized on June 7, 1946. Born prematurely in Lombardy, Italy, she was baptized Francesca, and from the age of reason, fervently desired to be a missionary. After applying to enter religious life in several communities, and always being turned down because of her frail health, she was advised by her bishop to start a religious community herself. As a result, she founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart and received approval in 1889 by Pope Leo XIII to go to the United States, where there were many Italian immigrants. Within a few months after the arrival of the first group of sisters, Mother Cabrini had already opened an orphanage and a school. She became a naturalized citizen in 1909, and during the remainder of her life, she founded a total of 67 charitable institutions and houses of her congregation. During her lifetime, she obtained a number of special favors through her prayers. She died in Chicago just before Christmas in 1917. The opening prayer of the Mass makes specific reference to the fact that Mother Cabrini went from Italy to the United States to serve the immigrants. Her heart had been set on going to China, but both her bishop and Pope Leo XIII had insisted that the missionaries of the Sacred Heart should work in the United States. Mother Cabrini traveled back and forth to Italy more than 25 times, bringing back other sisters for the ever-expanding apostolate. Our petition in the opening prayer is that from the example of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, we may learn concern for the stranger, the sick, and the frustrated. In spite of her poor health, Mother Cabrini was a veritable dynamo of energy. At the same time, she was a woman of deep prayer and union with God. Her motto was taken from St. Paul, "I can do all things in him who strengthens me." The example of St. Francis Cabrini is especially relevant to the Catholics in the United States today. Her devotion to the service of the poor, the underprivileged, and the sick should prompt many individual Catholics to become active in works of charity for the needy. Moreover, in view of the tensions and prejudice that foster racial injustice, Mother Cabrini can help us to see Christ in all the men and women we meet. The opening prayer reads, "God, our Father, you called Francis Xavier Cabrini from Italy to serve the immigrants of America. By her example, teach us concern for the stranger, the sick, and the frustrated. By her prayers, help us to see Christ in all the men and women we meet." For Wineskins, I'm Sister Marie Barile, an Oblate Sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
With me is Father Jack Lavelle. Welcome to our show.
It's great to be here.
You know, we're talking about the Eucharist, and I'd like to kind of talk about what a sacrament is, first of all, and then go into how special the Eucharist is for us as Roman Catholics. So define sacrament, if you could, for us.
Well, the sacrament is, in all 7 of them, is God's very special gift of grace at work in our lives in particular ways. And, not to recap things that may have already been said, but, we see within the 7 sacraments, we divide them up more in initiation and in healing and in vocation. But each of those is a strengthening of God's grace at work in our lives, and especially the gift of the Eucharist, which is the one sacrament of initiation that is repeatable. And so it recognizes that while we are baptized once, while we are confirmed once, while we might hope that one is ordained a priest and remains in that vocation, or one is married and hopefully remains faithful to that vocation, and even in the sacrament of the anointing of the sick, it used to be that you were anointed once. Now, we know that things happen throughout lives, and certainly reconciliation is repeatable, but the Eucharist is that one that is such a direct link to how we see that continued gift of God's grace and mercy and peace at work in our lives, and then to go out and share it. So we are constantly nourished so that we can go out and constantly share.
Let's go back to that word initiation that you used. We know that Eucharist is part of the sacraments of initiation. Let's talk about that word and that process of why and how someone is initiated and why those 3 sacraments are crucial.
To be initiated into anything is to not just sign up or not just say, okay, I'll do this. In any workforce, in any organization, in any activity, you really want to become more immersed into the life and the understanding and the whole dynamic of what is presented. And so, while in other faith traditions it may simply be, oh, great, come. And certainly we welcome people in, but we want them to really have a full understanding of who we are and who we are called to be. It begins in the sacrament of baptism, which is the first and the gateway to all the other sacraments. Then we certainly see the sacrament of Eucharist, the repeatable one, as I mentioned. And then if you're following the normal pattern for us as Roman Catholics and the age frame we have, we then culminate with confirmation, the confirmation of the gifts of the Spirit. Now, the interesting thing is, in most organizations or workplaces, people would understand that once you've done your internship or your initiation process, now you live fully. Oddly, sometimes in the church, we think that once we get to that point where we're fully initiated, now it's over. But it really is just getting us to the point where now we can begin to live fully all of these gifts of grace and God's love.
Let's kind of go into the law now. You had mentioned that the Eucharist is something we celebrate repeatedly. When are those times when we should not be receiving the Eucharist?
Well, certainly for us in our diocese and most dioceses in the United States, we follow a pattern where if a child has been baptized prior to this age, we would look for what is called the age of reason in canon law. We have determined in this part of the world, with all experts, theologians, but also medical and psychological, that about 2nd grade. And that's why you'll hear, 2nd grade. But we figure the age of reason, when the average child of age 7 or 8 can at least begin to discern what this gift of the Eucharist is, then we prepare them. Again, you just don't get in line, you're prepared. And then we go forward at Sunday Mass or weekday Masses, being able to be gifted with the Eucharist. If we are aware of grave, grave sin, and that would be something that is so harmful or so detrimental that it breaks our relationship with God and with others, then we do have the responsibility to go and receive reconciliation, to be absolved of that sin, so that with a pure heart we can receive the Eucharist. It's worth noting that in the life of the Church, which is 2,000 years old, it's really only been the last 100 plus that frequent reception of the Eucharist and the reception for children at the age that we celebrated. That all began with Pius X. And so it's certainly been the norm in everyone's lifetime now and their parents and grandparents, but it's just a fraction of the life of the Church.
And let's talk about those elements. We know that sacraments are made up of matter and form. Let's talk about the elements of bread and wine and how imperative and crucial and simple those 2 gifts are. Why would Jesus at the Last Supper use those elements of bread and wine?
As we look to that Last Supper, as we look to that Passover meal, hopefully many of us are aware there was far more on that table than bread and wine. There were all of those different delicacies that really began with the first Passover meal when the Exodus occurred. And yet within all of that food, all of that nourishment, it was Christ who took the most basic of elements. And while we might think of wine as something special when we go out to dinner or, we're having a family event, that was a very basic beverage. They didn't abuse it, but it was something that they always had. And certainly the bread, the flat bread, without any rising or anything that was reminiscent of how they had to depart so quickly in the Exodus. He did. He chose very purposely the two most basic elements that were part of that meal and exalted them as his body and his blood, perhaps to allow us to understand that he takes us very basically where we are, and yet if we invite him into our very being, we too are exalted to go out and do great things.
And let's talk of the role of the priest in the Sacrament of the Eucharist. That is vital and imperative. Why is that so important for us as a Catholic people to understand that mediatory presence?
The phrase we use is in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, not becoming Christ, but stands in the person of Christ as at the Last Supper himself. And, it's interesting to note the priest in the words of institution, the Eucharist, but also in the entire Eucharistic prayer, while we might make eye contact on occasion with people in the crowd, that is really not a prayer to the people or spoken out to the assembly. It's all spoken to God. And it really is the priest giving voice to everyone's prayer, asking God to do this great thing for us, to give us this gift of his Son's body and blood. But the priest really is consecrated and ordained to, at that moment, stand in the person of Christ and allow God's mercy and grace to enter those basic elements and then to be shared.
We know that the Greek word Eucharist comes from Eucharisto, meaning thanksgiving. So the Sacrament of the Eucharist is all about giving thanks. What do we give thanks for?
I think we give thanks for the very fact that in the context of the Mass, in the liturgy itself, that we could even be there that day, that God's grace woke us up and invited us to a new day. And we give thanks that we can gather in the freedom of worship to hear his word and to proclaim those prayers, to be nourished with that body and blood, and then always to go out on mission. I use the phrase often that we gather in word and sacrament to be sent forth on mission and ministry. And the thanksgiving to be in that relationship with God, to know his blessings and his gifts and his mercy and his forgiveness for those times when we fail, but that we're part of that we're part of that great family of faith, that we can be nourished and then go out and share those gifts.
For more information and to listen to Wineskins, visit the website catholicecho.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Where can you hear about faith in action?
What does hope look like in our parishes and schools?
How do we share God's love in our charities and outreach?
The Catholic Echo amplifies the voice of Catholics
in the 6 counties of the Diocese of Youngstown.
Connect with us to be inspired and challenged
to a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ and his Church.
Visit CatholicEcho.org to find the Catholic Echo magazine,
weekly podcasts, inspirational videos,
and our Sunday Mass from St. Columba Cathedral.
Follow diocesan social media on Facebook and Instagram.
Or find what's happening now at DOY.org.
The Catholic Echo is your source for spiritual growth in the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown.
Our song today is from the CD entitled Singing in the Presence of God. It is by Robert and Robin Coaches.
You shall cross the barren desert, but you shall not die of thirst. You shall wander far in safety, though you do not know the way. You shall speak your words in foreign lands, and all will understand. You shall see come follow me, and I will give you rest. Blessed are you poor, for the kingdom shall be theirs. Blessed are you that weep and mourn, for one day you shall laugh. And if wicked tongues insult and hate you all because of me, blessed are you. Be not afraid. I go before you always. Come follow me, and I will give you
Our scripture reflection for this 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time will be done by Sister Regina Rogers. She is an Ursuline sister of Youngstown.
Today's Gospel has a number of parts for our reflection. First is Jesus' admonition to watch out for those who lord their positions of authority over others. In this reading, he is talking about the scribes. They see life from the framework of their own importance. They are learned, ones who could read and were experts in the Hebrew language. Jesus' criticism comes because they are impressed with their own importance and lord it over the poor. All through the Gospels, Jesus is harsh with people whose prayers only give lip service to their faith, and he targets the treatment of this one widow by the scribes to make his point. In Hebrew society, it is widows who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, and the scribes take advantage of them for their own gain. Instead of helping the widows in need, these religious leaders were perfectly content to rob them of their livelihood and what little inheritance they might have. The second point is the place where Jesus is teaching. He is at the temple treasury. The purpose of the treasury is to receive the offerings of the people, the tithes dedicated to Yahweh. Jesus is sitting, watching many of the rich and poor offer their gifts. Point 3. Then a poor widow comes along and puts in 2 small copper coins. Here was a woman in need of receiving charity, yet she had a heart to give. The poor widow would have no source of income after her husband's death, yet she reached in and offered what she had to God. Now Jesus' laser focus goes right to the poor widow. She's the one who captures his attention, and she becomes central to his teaching. Now we have 2 contrasting protagonists in this story, the scribes and the poor widow. As so often happens, Jesus saw in her what no one else did. The text doesn't tell us whether the widow knew that Jesus had noticed her. In fact, she probably was accustomed to be overlooked. As a widow, she was largely an invisible person to the rich people in the temple area. Yet, she pushes her way through the crowd to reach the treasury and offer her coins. She believes that God will see her small act of faith. God does. Jesus sees her and loves her. By shining a light on the unnamed widow's generosity, Jesus reminds us that what is most important to God is not the quantity of the gift, but the generosity of the giver. This poor woman of faith gave an offering that resounded louder than the heaps of coin dropped into the treasury by others. As we strive to follow the example of the poor widow, let us remember that our giving is not limited to material possessions. We can offer our time, talent, and resources for the service of others. We can give our love, compassion, and forgiveness to those in need. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, like the widow's coin, can make a significant impact when done with a heart fully devoted to God. Today, let us pray for the grace to imitate the woman's generosity and faith. May our giving reflect the depth of our love for God and our trust in God's providence. And may we always remember that it is never the size or the amount of the gift, but the heart of the giver. May our hearts return to God, our love and gratitude in the small acts of kindness we perform this day. For Wineskins, I am Sister Regina Rogers.
The one true test of your religion and mine is what it does to our character. Does it turn our attention inward upon ourselves or outward upon the needs of others? If the chief concern of our relationship with Jesus Christ is to get our own little souls into heaven, then there is something wrong with our religion. Wineskins is made possible by the annual Diocesan Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. Wineskins is produced by the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. I'm Father Jim Korda, thanking you for being with us. Have a blessed Sunday, and may God be with you.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I bought her an orchid.
What have I done for my marriage today? I sent my husband a love email.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. But she's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Make a change for the better. Need help? Go to foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
They say America is the land of opportunity, but for some, life isn't so easy. Right now in America, 1 in 6 children lives below the poverty line. That's nearly 13 million children of all races, all across our country. Where do you draw the line and get involved? You can make a difference in more ways than you think. Go to povertyusa.org today, because 1 in 6 children in poverty is one too many. A message from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development.